All right. Cool. So I'll start with only one slide. I promise I'm not going to walk you through lots of different slides and bore you to death. We're going to jump into demo just in a couple of minutes. The reason why I want to show this slide is to give you a high-level picture of what we're going to go through. So crowd release. A lot of things that are changing around the API lifecycle, so aligns with our messaging around API-like connectivity. So I really wanted to highlight of what we're going to walk through. And this is basically how we can take an API from a point of design all the way to a production-ready service, and then basically reuse it with some of the design tools that we have already released as part of Crowd, which is the Flow Designer. So the flow of this demo would be really simple. We'll start with the design. We'll show you the new Visual Designer as well as the new API Designer. We will go into Endpoint Studio. We'll implement this API that we have designed the spec for. We'll go into and deploy that implementation as well as the proxy within the API Manager. And then we'll consume that API from a Flow Designer. As Pablo mentioned earlier, it changes in the middle of everything. So anytime when we're going to design a spec or build an implementation or deploy an API to the API Manager, we're going to be coming back to Change to understand how it enables you to discover all those things that are happening behind the scenes, right? So when you create a specification, there's an easy way to publish that to Change. When you create an implementation, same thing. You can share that with other people. When you deploy an API in the API Manager from Exchange, you can actually understand what endpoints and what deployments you can leverage and consume as the API consumer. And the Flow Designer, basically, it's another way of consuming an API, which is the design tool that we have released earlier. So this is the only slide. From here, I would go into our preview environment. And we are going to start with the Visual Designer. So what you guys see here on the screen is something that we already talked about. This is the Visual Designer that makes it really easy to design a specification for those people that are not familiar with RAML, or the guys that are not familiar with any specs out there. It makes it really, really intuitive to create that basic spec. So think of yourself as being the API product manager or API owner who's not technical persona in the company. There's still a need to kind of define what that interface is supposed to look like. So basically, this concept of the Visual Designer allows non-technical people to create the specification really easily through design tools. And just to illustrate how it's being done, I created a couple of resources for my API here. We're going to be talking in the whole demo, we're going to be talking about American flights that our training uses to get people up to speed with how to use the platform. So American Flight, you will see this name a lot in the next hour. And basically what I did with the Visual Designer, I kind of recreated what training already did with creating the specification, but I did it from the scratch, and it took me around 5 minutes to get these resources out, specify what methods and what actions are available for this API, and it was really intuitive, although I was not familiar with how to use a RAML, I'm a very, very basic user. It was really, really intuitive and really easy. So here you can see that you can specify the resource name, you can specify what actions you allow against that resource, and kind of provide the description to your API consumers of what that specific resource actually means. On top of it, you can add a body response, and you can specify what that is. I'm not going to configure everything since I already have that pre-created. I'm just going to show you how to add a new resource. For example, we'll start with an airport, and let's say we wanted to get a list of airports here. Is as easy as specify it as another resource, provide a description, get the list of airports, and basically you can also add the query parameters. So let's say you want to have query parameters by the city, and then you can add country, and things like that. So again, we give you guys access so you can play around and explore. It's really easy, really intuitive, no need to know RAML. And something that we mentioned earlier, it's fully integrated with the rest of the tools, design tools that we have. So there's an easy way to actually go and take this project and publish that to change, something that we can easily do with a few clicks of the button. But there's also a way to take this API design. I already have this asset, so let's rename it to something else. New API. All right. This guy right here. All right, so now we have the specification published in Exchange, and Exchange behind the scenes create a specification portal where you can go ahead as an API consumer and actually explore what this API means. I will not go to Exchange just yet. I'll show you one more thing, and then we'll go into Exchange to explore the portal. So basically, the other thing is that you can start, as we mentioned earlier, you can start designing your specification in the Visual Designer. So again, think back into a non-technical person designing a spec at the really high level, and then passing that spec over to someone more technical to actually take this to the production state. So for people that are more advanced with how to use RAML, we allow the editing RAML with the new API designer that we have released as part of the Crowd Phase 1. And basically, as you leave the edit mode, the visual mode, sorry, you go into the edit mode of the API designer, where you can see all this description, all the specification was already pre-generated for you based on those visual configs that you defined within the Visual Designer. And then basically, this is the new API designer. If you guys haven't seen it yet, you should. It's already available in production, so every new organization that you create gets access to a new API designer. Supports lots of new things. I'll highlight a few. It's natively integrated with Exchange for reusing dependencies. So what that means is imagine you have an organization that already produces a lot of reusable assets. And basically, when we think about reuse, we think reuse at the very early stage that starts with the API design. And for example, there are some data types that you probably want to reuse. In my case, this could potentially be an American flag data type that being created for this project earlier. But you can think of lots of other things that could empower this use case. So for example, I'll give you one that is probably something that I hear a lot in the field is imagine you design lots of APIs across your company, and those APIs need to be consistent. Right? So the way you talk about, the way you define an address, right? So there's lots of different ways on how you can define an address in the United States, how you can define an address internationally, and things like that. So with this fragment reuse, what we allow is for the API providers to define how the organization needs to think about those smaller data types, and so then they could be potentially reused across the entire organization portfolio of the APIs. That first enables the speed at which you can design those APIs, and second, the consistency of all those assets being produced. So this is a really cool thing. Works very easily. You add a specific dependency. API designer creates this dependency in here. And then basically you can reuse that dependency in your flow with includes that refer back to that specific RAML fragment. One more thing, branching, something that you guys asked earlier. Branching is supported. As Pablo mentioned, you can create new branches. but there's no way to merge them yet. So this is something coming a little bit later, but something which is really, really exciting because it was not possible before with the previous API designer that we have in the API platform. So this is a really new, exciting thing that we could definitely tell our customers and get them excited. And this API designer also allows the publication to change. In my case, I've already published this project. So let me actually show you how this will look. So this is my change. The API that I have pre-published a little bit earlier is this American Flight MTN. And this is our new API experience that is fully baked within the Anypoint Exchange. So for those that have used API portals before, they were natively integrated within the API platform. We decided to merge them with Anypoint Exchange because anytime when we have conversations around reuse, we always come back to this Center for Enablement, and we thought that this is basically a logical place for all design time assets to be stored. So APIs right now, it's also part of Exchange. So exciting things. As I published, so let me show you really quickly the API that I have published just now. So anytime when you publish an API, it automatically scaffolds a project for you. So it gives you all that information that automatically generated based on the specification. So you can see that I have multiple resources and methods available here. So I have flights. I can get a list of flights. I can see what's the request URL, and I can also kind of browse around through the Chart console that allows you to make the API calls. But the reason why I'm showing you that is that there's a lot of stuff that is being pre-generated and is available for the API consumers to take advantage of straight away. But there's a lot more that you can do to kind of provide a better experience. And the reason why I was opening the other one to just kind of like illustrate you a little bit of how the APIs, internal or external, could look like in the future. So for this API, we've created a description that provides you an overview what the API does, all the prerequisites and dependencies that you need to keep in mind, limitations and things like that. We also created FAQs and getting started, but basically this is just the content that you create on top of this API. And the same thing, there's lots of available methods that you can explore. And again, this is being pre-generated based on the spec. The other things that were not possible before, and I also wanted to highlight because it's really important to keep those things in mind, is first of all, at the very, very first time, we allow proper versioning in the API portals, and the versioning comes in two different flavors. So I have this V1 and V2 of the API. So version 1 and version 2 of the API, this is something which is the API consumer-facing versioning, and there is also a versioning of assets. So every time when I make a change to my specification, those things, when you publish them, they're being versioned on the back end of the change with the repository service that we have. And this is also really important because we had lots of customers in the past that came to us and said like, hey, we really like your idea of the API platform and, how easy it is to make changes, update new proxies and things like that. But there was a huge problem that you could have your production APIs running and you allow your API providers to go and change the spec for that production API that is not being versioned. So you cannot track the changes, you cannot version them, and it was a really, really big implication that we've heard a lot. So right now I wanted to specify there are two different versions. One is the API consumer facing, which is the API version, and this is the asset version that is basically a RAML version that's being created on the back end of Exchange, and it's basically pre-generated for you. The other exciting thing is here what I can see is this widget that illustrates what asset versions I have and where those asset versions are being deployed. So this is more of a provider information. Basically what this thing tells me is that, hey, as part of my API design, I have produced 3 different specs. I was iterating through this design several times up until I got something production ready. And then as I published this to Exchange automatically created a mocking service for me that is locked with this API version. And at the same time, I also deployed a proxy for this API that I called the production North America 1, and is basically a production-ready service that is available for this API. And I'll show you this just in a couple of seconds. There's a lot of things that are net new. I would just advise to kind of like, explore lots of things that we have provided. But a few extra things that I wanted to highlight is that right now with Exchange, we also provide an ability to rate and leave the feedback on APIs and any other assets. Again, something that was not possible before. We've heard this from many different customers is that, hey, it's really good to be able to provide an API to my API consumers, but I don't really know how those APIs are being used. If people have problems or not, the only piece of information that we give them is the API analytics that tell you a number of clients being registered, a number of requests, but you don't really know what's the quality of documentation that you put in front of the API consumer. What if something doesn't work? So right now, this is another thing that we can position for our customers and get them excited. So right now, going a little bit into the technical side of how you can explore the specification and consume them. So as I said, I pre-created this API, and it's kind of like already version 1 already has a couple of services that I can consume. And basically, if you navigate to a specific method of the API, you'll be able to see that, hey, those are the services that are available for you to consume. So I have a mocking service, or I can actually call my production API. And as you can see, anytime when you change this service in the dropdown, it changes the URL that I'm going to be calling. So instead of calling the mocking service, I'll be calling the production proxy that I have defined. And it's easy as sending this towards the API and getting the callback, all within the context of the portal. So again, this is basically simplicity. No need to use Postman, no need to use Advanced REST client or any other clients that you might be using. Everything is available here, and you can make API calls very easily from the portal itself. So this is just to get you guys excited a little bit of what's in Exchange. As I said, we're going to walk you through the full flow on how to start with an API design and how to go all the way to production-ready service. I showed you how the production-ready service could look like, but let me actually show you on how to get to that state. So for the version 2, as you can see, I only have 2.0.0 spec that I have published. As a new spec, it's only available as a mocking service. So right now, let's take this API to a production-ready state. And as we all know, like as you have a specification ready and available, the next step is to build an implementation on top of your backend systems that you have. For that, we will go into Anypoint Studio. And this is the 6.4 build. 6.3 plus supports Crowd. So make sure if you guys are going to be testing that yourself later today or tomorrow, that you use 6.3 or latest, because the previous studio does not have a full support of Crowd. So basically, I already have a project pre-created, but let me show you how it would look like if I wanted to configure everything from the scratch. So we go into a project. I'll say I want to create new. I'll say I want to create a mule project. I'll call it American. And I would add an API kit component that basically enables the studio to scaffold a project on the backend for you based on the specification that you created earlier. So the way it will work is that I would add an API key component. I'll go into Design Center. This is basically where all the API specifications are being stored. And here where you will be able to see is that this is the list of the design time projects that are available for you. So in my case, it would be an American Flight API. You can see that there is lots more. And you can also see what branch those APIs refer to. So again, in my case, I would pre-select American Flight. I'll click OK, click on Finish. And basically what Studio will do in the end of the day, we'll go to Design Center, get that specification, parse it, and scaffold it for me with all these reusable flows that basically already provide me kind of like a halfway through the implementation that I need to build for this API. So all the specifications have set payload defined in my RAML, so they're still kind of being mocked. I'm not going to go and implement this API because normally it takes a while. I already pre-created a project with this assets that are being provided by training, which is, again, we all talking about reuse. Reuse comes even internally when we need to have this assets for a demo. But basically, here's the project. It's based on the specification that I already published in Exchange. It's available in my VCS within the Design Center. And I have implemented this to a database, and everything is already pre-configured. What I can do, I can run it locally and just test it and make sure that everything works. So if we run this locally, again, I'm not going to focus a lot of time because you guys have already seen the Studio experience before. If I run it locally, this is where I can also go and consume this API to play around with it. I can send a GET request, get a response back. This goes and talks to my databases that I configure on the back end. But basically, this allows you to quickly debug and test the implementation before you publish that to Exchange or deploy this to the runtime manager. So since we have this API, it's working, it gets a response back, it's fully configured, it's implemented with the API specification that we have designed earlier, I think it's ready to go. We can actually share this with other people through Exchange and also make this API as an available service. So for this, we will go into Anypoint Platform. I wanted to show you one thing which is not available, and it's basically the reason why it's not available is that I haven't Mavenized the project. In order to publish things to Exchange, you need to Mavenize it first. So I'm not going to publish that to Exchange, but the idea is basically it will have another portal available for you for that specific implementation. What I will do instead, I'll deploy this API to a Cloud Hub. And deploying things to a Cloud Hub, you first need to specify what environment you want to deploy to. In my case, I'll use the Sandbox. Takes a little while. And spinning and spinning. Let's try it once again. If it doesn't work, I have a backup. So we deploy this to Cloud Hub. Cloud Hub, please work. All right, so this is not a very exciting thing because it's already available. So I hope that most of you already know about what this experience is supposed to be like. First, you select a specific environment that you want to deploy to. Then you configure your deployment. Then you specify an application name. You select how many vCores you want to put to power that specific implementation. And then you click on deploy. It takes around a couple of minutes. Sends a new worker. This application becomes available within the runtime manager. Not exactly sure why this is not working. This is our preview environment, so there might be some work going on behind the scenes. But basically, I already mentioned that I have a backup. So let's go to the backup, and I'll show you how it looks. So we will open and we'll search for NTN. And this is basically the implementation that I have deployed yesterday when preparing for a demo. So you can see that this American Flight API being already deployed. Here's my application URL that is available for me. And it's basically up and running. So I can make API calls to the implementation and have it consumed. But we all know that exposing the implementation URL is not the best practice. Normally, you want to manage those things through the API manager to make sure that you have a proxy in front of the API. This allows you better security. You can apply lots of different policies around throttling and lots of other things. So basically what we're going to do now is we have the implementation up and running within the runtime. We're going to go to the API manager and create a proxy for this. So this is, again, going back into crowd experience, runtime, and Studio existed before, right? Not a very exciting part for most of you, but going back into crowd, things that's supposed to excite you guys. So notion of environments, something that was not possible before. We've heard it many, many times from our customers that been crying and saying, hey, you know, you have runtime manager, it has notion of environments. Right now I want to deploy a proxy on top of this API, and right now I need to deploy this into a solution that does not support an environment. So that was a really, really big inconsistency. So with the new API manager, you have access to the same environments that you have defined within the access manager. In my case, I have a sandbox in production. In order to deploy my proxy, I'll choose the sandbox first. And basically, the other very exciting thing is that what Paulo was mentioning is that there's no need for you to kind of like go and do everything from the scratch. Since you already produce a specification, you have an implementation and everything already published in Exchange, we make it really easy to go to any point Exchange and find this API. So in my case, this is American Flight API MTN that I published earlier. I will do the implementation for version 2 because version 1 is already implemented. This is my asset version that's going to be used by the API gateway in order to define what that API interface would be like. And then we are going to say we will use this API, we'll manage this API with endpoint with a proxy, and here's where we need to provide an implementation URL. So this is not a very user-friendly flow, but this is the only place where you need to go and do a little bit of copy pasting. So I'll come here, copy my application URL, copy it here, say it goes and talks to HTTP, this URL, and then I also have the path configured. Basically this is the endpoint where my application implementation lives and runs within the runtime manager. And within the advanced options, I could also provide a name of this proxy. So let's call it North America 2. Let's say that's a deployment region that I have. And basically, we're good to go here. We'll click on Save. We'll select a runtime version, and we'll call it Stage American. Okay, and we're ready. This will be version 2. And then we're ready to deploy. So this is something that will take a couple of seconds, the maximum number of 1.2. All right, while I'm demoing, Paulo will give me access to more viewports for my account. One more thing that I could illustrate before I get access to more viewports is that there's also a way in the API manager to provide a consumer-facing endpoint. In my case, it would basically be something that would be exposed to the API consumers as the publicly facing URL. We're still working on experience to make it a little bit better. When you make this deployment to Cloud Hub, we actually know what that production endpoint is going to be. But basically, right now, I'll do another round of copy pasting, and I'll point out where those endpoints are going to be surfaced through change a little bit later. But basically, as a consumer endpoint, this is something that you should be thinking of anytime when you deploy an API and you want to expose that publicly facing URL that API consumers will be able to use to make API calls through the API. So Pablo is saying that I have vForce. I need to refresh the screen. Let's see if it's true. We'll call it staging American 2. And then let's see if everything else is already predefined. American 2, where'd it go? Cool, I got the vCourse. Now I can deploy things to the API Manager. This is something that takes, I'll say around 30 seconds, so let's close the screen and provide this URL in here so we can reuse it a little bit later. It will be http .io, as far as I remember. And this is basically will be an endpoint for my URL. So my API is up and running. I have a...
Let's check the URL. What's that? No, proxy URL.
A proxy. Oh, right here. Cool. I can actually reuse this one. Thanks for the tip. All right, so we're ready to go. Right now, the really exciting thing that we can do, we can go back to the Exchange. And again, what I mentioned, we're always going to be coming to Exchange to illustrate how Exchange kind of like provides you visibility over everything that you do with design, assets, running your deployments on the API Manager, Future, and the Runtime Manager as well. And quickly show you that this specific endpoint is now available for the API consumers to find, discover, and consume. So right now I have a version 2. It says there's the North America 2 proxy available. One thing just to mention, we'll also add a little bit more information around what environments this proxy lives. So it will be more clear that this is North America 2 and in Sandbox environment. This is something that will come in a week or so. It will be less confusing. And basically, we can make API calls. And here's the response back. Basically, goes all the way through proxy to the implementation to the backend systems that I have, surfaced automatically through endpoint exchange, available for all API consumers internally that have access to this specific API. And again, one really exciting thing is that everything is versioned. Everything is documented in terms of what services are available. And this is basically an API experience within Exchange. I'll go back into API Manager for one more thing, and then we'll speak a little bit more on how to take photos and expose them to external API consumers. And then we also will touch base really quickly on the Flow Designer and how you can use this to consume this specific APIs. So the reason why I came back to the API Manager, you guys remember I talked about that we have environments, but a really exciting thing with a supportive environment that we have is that we support the promotion. So right now, instead of going and redeploying the whole thing from scratch, what you can do, you can say, hey, you already have an API that's being managed in the Sandbox. I actually want to reuse this API and promote it to my production environment. I'm going to select what API is that, what version I want to promote, add a proxy, and basically I can also include policies, SLAs, alerts, and configurations within that specific promotion. So what you can do, something that I've missed for a specific reason, we don't have that much of time to focus on everything in the end-to-end flow. We're going to be doing deep dives tomorrow, where we'll touch base a little bit more into the API Manager, Visual Designer, and Exchange. But something that you can do is define the policies for this specific API in staging environment. So then once you take this API to production, it automatically carries over all that security things that you need to apply for your production-ready services. And we'll click on Promote. It's as easy as configuring the same thing once again. I'm specifying what front end we're going to want to use. I'll call it Production American V2. It's already taken, V3, and basically ready to deploy. Once it's being deployed, I will do the same thing. I'll go and update this endpoint, and again, it's a consumer-facing endpoint that you need to think of. In my case, it will be production. We'll go back to Exchange. And now, if we navigate into a specific method, we'll have two different North America 2. I know it's not very intuitive. We adding a tag of what environment is being deployed. So think of a week from now experience with the preview environment. You will see that there's two North America 2 deployments available for this API, and you will also know what specific environments those things are being deployed. So the reason why this is important, think of your API lifecycle. Think of the API lifecycle where you start with a mocking service, then you go push something to dev, then you take it to QA, staging, and production. So every time when you make this promotion happen, there's different implications that you need to think of from how you secure this API, right? So the mocking service is really easy to use. You can make a call without sending the authorization data, and will still work because it's a mocking service. It's supposed to work with a few simple clicks. It just gives you the information that is required, but it does not enforce that information to be collected in order to get a response back. But then imagine you also have a dev environment and a production environment. So in the dev environment, you can still want to kind of give a lot of flexibility to developers on, removing any authorization data, just unblocking them to kind of move a little bit faster. And as you promote it to staging and production, that's where you will use lots of security policies on top of the API to make sure that it's fully secured before you expose it to everyone else. So basically the reason why this is important is that by browsing through all the available endpoints, you also see what are the different things that are required for this API. So in case there is authorization that you need to use, will be reflected based on what specific environment or endpoint you're talking to. So again, if you're talking to production that's being secured with the auth2, you will see that information. If you're talking to dev environment that is not being secured, then the API consumer will see that it's not secure, and they can just start consuming that straight away. So I think it's really important. It's really cool from developer point of view, because as a developer, the only thing that I care about the API version and the environment that I want to build my stuff on top of, and then basically everything else is guided by the API experience within Exchange. One more thing before we jump into how the external experience looks like. Those are the API consumers that are external to the organization. We'll walk you through that just in a few seconds. There's one more thing. You know that APIs managed by Endpoint Platform have a support for Client ID enforcement policy. This is basically why I'm showing you the request API access. Just wanted to highlight this since there are minor changes on how we think about this. So requesting API access allows you to create a client that has a set of client ID and client secret that you can use in order to consume that specific API. You can create a new application. You can reuse an existing one. I already have an existing app. Then you basically, this is the main change, is that you also need to specify what instance you're going to consume. And it's basically a change on the back end, creates a client that has a contract that's associated to this specific API instance that's being deployed to a given environment. And then SLA tiers, I haven't defined any, and terms and conditions are available here. And then I can request this thing. And basically, as I request an API access, I can see my client ID and client secret that I can use in order to consume this API. And one more thing to showcase is that client applications also move to Exchange. So right now, this is the single place where I can go and see that, hey, I have Mton's app. It's consuming this specific APIs. So I registered this against 3 APIs to consume. And this is the client ID and client secret that I can use in order to make API calls towards those APIs. So really quick, really important thing to highlight. My applications are available here. Home screen of any point of change. Very easy to request API access. And this is the place where you can find them. All right. Been talking for the last 40, 45 minutes. I'm going to do the last stretch of 10, 15 and finish the whole demo, kind of giving you the full overview. 2 more things. Public portals and the experience from a flow designer. So let's start with the public portals. Very simple, something that we used to have before with the notion of the developer portals within the API platform. We rebuild the experience from the Exchange point of view. Just wanted to showcase you how the things have changed, because this basically will have an effect on how things look and feel for the external API consumers. So within any point of change, you can find this tab that says a public portal. A public portal is the easiest way to think about it. It's an external website that is available to everyone on the web. So if you copy this URL, go into incognito, you'll still be able to see it, to access it. Right? It's searchable on Google. It's something that external developers will be using in order to discover the APIs provided by your organization. So it looks different from what we had before. There's a couple of exciting things that we added in terms of branding customization. Again, it's still an MVP. We will be working more into building more and more capabilities to make it look better. But just a couple of things to walk you through. So each of the developer portal has its welcome section where you can provide a message to your developers to upload the image. We have a support for something that we call custom pages. And custom pages are global for across the entire website. So you can document lots of things like, hey, if you have partners are supposed to come here. I haven't done a really good job on creating a lot of exciting content, but you can think that this could be exciting. Then you can provide terms and conditions and things like that. And basically discovering APIs. The discovery is still kind of like, it's very related to how the API consumption and discovery experience look like from internal Exchange. It's slightly different because we do believe that external consumers don't need to have access to certain information, so they don't see when this API was created or who created this internally. So we remove lots of noise, and we basically give you a really high-level information about this API that you can still explore. What I will do to show you a couple of exciting things on how to get this portal up and running and how to add APIs. I will go into my API provider experience, and that's where we have this button that says customize. The reason why this button appears here is that I have certain permissions and roles. I can click on customize, and basically this is here where I can say, hey, it's not MuleSoft. This is my welcome to my Acme developer portal. I can specify a little bit more information. I can upload a new image. Let's see if we have something. I can upload a new image for, strange happened. I can upload a new logo for my portal. I can upload a new background image if I want to. We also support GIFs, which is a really exciting thing. You can have an animation running in the background. It's really fun if you play around with that. Then you can specify lots of customization criteria like background color, text colors, and things like that. And this is basically the place where you can add more custom pages. And this custom pages basically become visible inside the portal here. So that being said, there's lots of customization features that were not possible before. It's not a final state yet. There's a lot of other things that we're going to be doing, but I just wanted to illustrate for you so you have an idea on how this will work. One important thing before I finish with the portal is that there's also a very easy way to make your API public. What it needs to be done is that Exchange administrators will have access to see this button that says Add to Public Portal. And basically, when you click on that, you will be able to specify what versions you want to expose publicly. The reason why we believe that versions are also important to kind of like have that level of granularity is that not all the versions you want to make public, and some of them might be, simply internal access only. So in my case, let's make only version 2 public and available on the portal. So if I go back into my portal, refresh the screen, I should see an American Cloud API. This is what I have created, and this is what is being available for all external consumers to discover and consume. As you can see, I'm not able to provide feedback. I'm not able to request API access either. So if I go into, there's no button request API access, and the reason why is that I need to log in. So this is the last thing that I'm touching base on the portals. Wanted to say that this is probably the biggest bug that we had for several years within the existing portals. I've heard a lot of complaints. I've heard people filing S1 tickets saying, hey, we build a public portal. We have this public APIs. Right now we want to onboard external consumers, but there's no easy way to onboard them because we need to manually invite each one of them to get access. So we fixed for that with something that we call the federated identity. It simplifies to a level of a single sign-on within the Anypoint platform. So basically what this means, if you have an Anypoint platform account, you can use it to sign in and consume this API. If you don't have an Anypoint platform account, you can sign up for one and get access to this API. So in my case, I'm going to be using my other accounts to log in. That should have been working. Refreshing the screen helps. Still a little buggy. Oopsie. All right, but it's going to work now. All right, I actually did log in. There was some problem with the redirects, so one of the bugs that we need to report back to the engineering. But basically an idea is, as an external consumer, I can log in, self-sign in or self-sign up into this specific portal. I have this user that's related to my other Anypoint platform account, and for the API providers, right now there's this place within the Access Manager where I can see the list of all the external consumers that have been onboarded through Developer Portal. I'll jump into that just in a few seconds as this page loads. So if you navigate into users and you go into the external users, this is basically where I need to see another bug. But this is basically, envision, this is basically where I will see the list of all external consumers. The things that I'll be able to do is I'll be able to revoke access or block them completely from consuming my APIs if I would like to. But this is basically a notion of where and how I can manage users that are external to my organizations because they have an ability to self-sign up for the public APIs that I host. All right. We talked through how to start with an API design, go into the implementation of that stack, publish both the API stack and the implementation to Exchange. We've talked about how to deploy those implementation to runtime. We've talked about how to deploy a proxy on top of that implementation into a specific environment, how to promote an API from one environment to the other. We've talked about how you can discover all those things and changes through Anypoint Exchange, since it's indexing every single design time asset and the runtime deployment that you do. We've talked about what's the user experience like for the API consumers and how to make these APIs public so that external consumers like partners or external developers can access that. One more thing, Flow Designer. It's also fully integrated with the rest of Crowd. I'm not going to spend that much of time because Flow Designer has been available for already a couple of months, but wanted to showcase you just a few things so you have an idea of mine. And it's basically, imagine we've been creating lots of different APIs, right? Like we have hundreds, probably even thousands of developers within the organization. We've been providing and creating those reusable APIs and services. So right now, imagine we want to create a project that will connect to one of those APIs. And for that, we're going to go into Design Center, create a new Mule project, and that's basically Flow Designer being available here. Again, not going to spend that much time walking you guys through. That's been out there for a while, but a thing that is really important to highlight is as you create your flow, all the APIs are being automatically indexed through the Flow Designer, and it's basically possible through a REST Connect that we've been talking about for a while, that on the background, as I publish a new API to Exchange and I create a new service, on the background, the REST Connect creates a connector that is being used by a Flow Designer and in the future by Studio 7 with the Mule 4 release, and makes it very, very easy to discover those APIs that are being published to Exchange. So this is the list of my American Flight APIs. I've created a few, so you can see what are those things available in the dropdown. I can see all the operations that are possible here. So let's say I want to get a list of flights, and then all those query parameters that I have defined in my specification, they are also available here. And then basically imagine that I have a use case to dropping this data into a database. I don't really know why would someone do this, but let's say I want to build for a use case for storing the data in a different place, just in case something goes wrong. And then it's as easy as building this flow. I'm not going to configure everything since we're running out of time, but basically the idea is very simple. Everything that you are producing and everything that's being stored within the Anypoint Exchange becomes available and natively integrated with the rest of the design time tools. So if you're not new to the company or not new to Anypoint platform, you probably want to use the API portals because this is something more standardized towards the industry best practices on where and how you can actually discover the specification, learn how to consume it and use it. But if you are a native to the Anypoint platform and you know how to use Flow Designer and Studio, it's actually really nice to integrate it with the rest of the tools. So instead of going and trying to build this thing from the early scratch, writing the custom code, you can actually come to Flow Designer and reuse all those assets really easily, very natively, and get this flow done in a matter of minutes and not hours. And basically, this is it. This is the entire platform end-to-end, touching base on lots of new features that we have produced in the last, I would say, a year. There's been more than a year after that we've been rebuilding the full API platform experience. Hope you guys excited.